Hello everyone. So today we will be solving the problem set matrix zeros. So we have got a matrix here and we have to set its entire row and column to 0 if we are finding a 0. For example, in the first example, if we see we have got our first row first element as 0. So we will turn the entire first row to be 0 and the entire first column to be 0. We also see in our first row last column a 0, so we will turn the entire first row and last column to be 0. Now in the second example we see a 0 in our second row second column, so we will turn the entire second row and second column to be 0. So we have to see an approach, find an approach to do this. So the approach would be, we will be having two boolean variables, that is first row has 0 and first column as 0 to ensure if our first row or our first column will be having any 0. So in the first case, both of them are true as we have got this as 0. So our first row has got 0. Like this one is also in first row. So our first row has got 0 and our first column has got 0. But in our second case, both of these are false. So this would be our first step. Now our second step would be that wherever we are finding a 0, we will update the first element of that row and column to be 0. So in the first example, it is already updated. Like for our first 0, you can see the first element of that row and column is 0. And for the second 0 also, the first element for the second 0, the first element would be this one is already 0 and the first element of the column is also 0. Now in our second case, what we will do is we will be updating the first element of our column and the first element of our row containing 0 to be 0. So this would be our second, this would be the second step. Now our third step would be like we will be checking in the rest of the matrix, like we would be checking apart from the first row and first column, we would be changing all the cells to 0 wherever we have the first element of the row and first element of the column to be 0. So in the second case, if you would see, we have got 0 in our second column and second row. So we will be changing all the cells of the second column and second row to be 0. So now we have got the required output for our second example. But if we go on to our first example, how it will be changed? If you would see, now this will remain the same as we are just checking in the remaining part of the first row and first column. Like we are leaving the first row and first column. So this will remain the same. In this, what will be changed? These will be changed. So this will remain the same. Now this will be changed because we have got a 0 here. So we will be changing the last column, like all the cells of the last column to be 0. Now if we move forward, like this will be our second step. Now our third step would be, as these are true, like our first row has 0 or our first column has 0, so we will update that first row completely as 0 if we have got first row has 0, and if we would be having our first column as 0, then we will be updating the cells of the whole column of the whole first column to be 0. So now these would be 0 and we have got our output. So these are the four steps that we would be following to get the output. So let's move over to Leetcode and see how we can code this. First, we will keep track of the number of rows. So that would be length of matrix. Then we will keep track of the number of columns. That would be length of matrix of the 0th row. After that, we would have our boolean variables, that is first row has 0 to be false, and we will be having our first call has 0 to be false. So after that, we would be iterating through our matrix. So for row in range of m, we will check for row, sorry, for column in range of n. So we will check if the element is 0. So for matrix row and col, if that is a 0, we will check if like we have got any 0 in our first row. So we will see if row is equals to 0, what we will do is we will have our first row has 0 to be set to true. If our first column would be having 0, then we will set our first col has 0 to be true. After that, we would be having like if we do not have our first row and column, we do not have any 0, then we will be setting our first element of the row and the column where we would be having our 0. We would be setting the first element of that row and column to be 0. So this would be matrix of 0 and col. So we will be setting that to 0. After that, we would be coming out of this loop and we would be going to our second step, which would be we would be seeing in the rest of the matrix if our first element of the row and column is 0, we would be setting the whole like the whole cells, the rows and columns to be 0. So for row in range of 1 to m and for col in range of 1 to n, what we will do is we will have our matrix row and col set to 0 if our matrix row 0 would be equals to 0 or our matrix having 0 col as 0. So yeah, as 0, else we would just be having that element whichever is present. So that would be matrix row and col. So now we will go to our third step, which would be if our first row or column will be having zeros. So if our first row has 0, that is this variable is true, then we will change all we will change all the elements of our first row to be 0. So for col in range n matrix, we will be changing all the elements in our first row to be 0, and if our first column has 0, then we will be changing our row in range of m, that would be matrix row 0, we would set it to 0. Like we will set all the cells of the first column to be 0. Now let's run this and see if we are getting any error in the test cases. So this is pretty much how we would be carrying forward the steps and be solving this problem. Thank you for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one.